If you're part of the industrial engineering community, you're probably familiar with a lot of the misperceptions, misunderstandings, and general confusion surrounding the discipline. This is because industrial engineering is often not very well understood by industry, or society, or even the industrial engineering community itself. In this video, I wanted to talk about some of these common misperceptions and misunderstandings and to explore why they might be happening and offer a more clear and accurate perception of what industrial engineering is. To back the claims that I make in this video, I will be relying on my personal experience having been an industrial engineering student and trying to explain industrial engineering to non-industrial engineers out in society. I will also be relying on a bunch of studies that were done actually exploring the perceptions of industrial engineering. I will link these studies down below if you're interested in checking them out. To begin this discussion of the misperceptions and misunderstandings surrounding industrial engineering, I wanted to start with one of the most common misperceptions that I've come across, and that is that industrial engineers work only in the manufacturing or production industries. The fact that this misconception is so common is actually quite understandable. It comes back to the term industrial and that this term is often linked to the manufacturing and production industries. So in that way, a person hearing the term industrial for the first time might make the link that industrial engineers work only in manufacturing and production industries. And you know, they're not all wrong. In the past, that was the case because industrial engineering did originate and evolve with the first industrial revolution. However, in modern times, that's not the case, and industrial engineers work in all sorts of industries all over the world. In fact, industrial engineers can often be found in unexpected industries like the healthcare industry, the banking industry, or even the entertainment industry. Believe it or not, some industrial engineers work in Disney World. To be more nuanced, industrial engineering applications don't even need to be made in macro industry as we typically understand it. Industrial engineering applications can be made to any place that has a process or a system going on, whether that's the sports sector, or a park, or a university, or even the household. So in summary, we can see that the term industrial doesn't necessarily refer to the manufacturing and production industry, although it can. Really, it can refer to any industry, anywhere in the world, or even more broadly, any process or system that can have industrial engineering applications applied to it. Now we can move on to discussing the engineering part of industrial engineering and how there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding that as well. For example, in studies done on perceptions of industrial engineering, students described industrial engineering to be not really engineering. They also described it as being imaginary, invisible, easy, and even stupid. In general, there seemed to be a perception that industrial engineering is not as rigorous as the other engineering disciplines, and that it had a distance from mathematics and technology. To expand on this perception that is trying to minimize the engineering part of industrial engineering, I can give a few examples that I heard when I was studying industrial engineering, or that I had heard from other industrial engineers. So, for example, my degree was called the Bachelor of Engineering in Industrial Engineering. So the other engineering students would often make jokes and say things like, oh, your degree should be called BA Engineering, so that would be Bachelor of Arts, or BCom Engineering, so Bachelor of Commerce. Perceptions of engineers and engineering can be expanded to society at large. Now, society seems to perceive engineers to be these Bob the Builder types of figures. So somebody who is wearing a helmet and has tools and has the role of fixing things with construction and mechanics. But that's not really the reality of engineers, especially industrial engineers. To determine whether industrial engineers really are engineers depends entirely on how you choose to define engineering. There are certainly definitions out there where industrial engineering doesn't quite fit. So for example, this is the definition of engineering that I get off Wikipedia, which is: engineering is the use of scientific principles to design and build machines, structures, and other items, including bridges, tunnels, roads, vehicles, and buildings. And yes, industrial engineering doesn't really fit into that definition because industrial engineers don't really design and build these physical structures, rather they design and build processes and systems. However, if we try a different definition of engineering, such as engineering is the application of science and maths to solve problems, then yes, industrial engineering does fit that definition. It just so happens that industrial engineers solve problems in ways that are different than traditional engineers. First of all, industrial engineers use both the hard sciences and the soft sciences, and they don't only solve technical problems, they solve all sorts of problems. And yes, they do use math, they just tend to use a different type of math than other engineers. It's important to add that industrial engineers are often distanced from other engineers because industrial engineers actually deal with people as part of their work. And this is atypical for other types of engineers. However, this is simply engineers being more holistic in their work and being more interdisciplinary. So it's important not to minimize the engineering aspect of industrial engineering simply because industrial engineers are bringing in more variables such as people into their work. It's also important not to minimize the potential rigorousness of the industrial engineering curriculum just because it doesn't have as much physics and chemistry as the other engineering disciplines. Now, rigorousness is an interesting concept, and we can't really reduce it to simply having a lot of math and science in your curriculum. I would say that in an engineering concept, what's really important is understanding that there can be rigorousness and complexity in any type of problem, and it's really up to you how much you want to dive into your subject matter and try to solve that problem creatively and scientifically. And it's not really so much about the types of scientific theory that you study in your undergraduate years, but rather how much you're willing to dive into your work and challenge yourself intellectually to solve problems in an efficient and productive way. Moving on, the final set of misconceptions that I wanted to talk about were the ones that link industrial engineering to business. Going back to that study I mentioned earlier, industrial engineering was often described as business engineering, the business of engineering, or a glorified business degree. From my personal experience, industrial engineering was once described as a business degree on steroids, and people would often brush us off as not engineers, but rather as managers or something like that. I can understand why people often emphasize the interface between industrial engineering and business. First of all, business is a generally well understood concept, so it's easy to make that link to try to simplify what industrial engineering is and make it easier to explain. However, I would say that that is an oversimplification and that it can be misleading or limiting for industrial engineers. While it is true that industrial engineers often deal with businessy types of concepts like management and accounting, industrial engineers are still unique, and so are businessmen or business majors. It's important not to limit industrial engineers by viewing them as being businessmen or business administrators. Industrial engineers at their core are problem solvers, and yes, while they can be involved in the management, administration, and improvement of businesses, they can be involved in a lot of different other fields and industries as we discussed earlier. The industrial engineering curriculum is also much more mathematically inclined than the business curriculum. There are many more misconceptions surrounding the industrial engineering discipline, but in this video I wanted to talk about some of the more common ones, and you might have found this relatable. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your own misconceptions that you might have had in the past about industrial engineering, or some of the common ones that you hear other people expressing. Feel free to share those in the comments below. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and I hope you have a great day.